Mr. Mike.
Welcome again. We're lucky today to actually have a second talk on the cards and a second J talk, and I'm thrilled to be welcoming Apoorv Bhargava. He has been somewhat of a mentor of mine during my first year at the GSB. He is passionate about clean energy as I am, led the Energy Club as president of the Stanford Business School Energy Club, and has a fascinating story for us about his background. So welcome, Apoorv.
Thanks so much, Jason. Glad to be on J Talk.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So let's start at the beginning. You were born in India, grew up in Cyprus.
That's right.
Pretty interesting journey you've had.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So as you mentioned, I was born in India. I was born around Delhi and in the north part of India, and then moved out to Cyprus when I was about 3 months old. The reason we moved out was mostly because of my parents' work, and so we moved out and we had a short stint in London, but then moved back to Cyprus, where I went to a British school my entire life. And Cyprus is a really interesting place. You know, it's it's in the eastern Mediterranean, and it's a divided island. The north part of Cyprus is occupied currently by Turkey, and then the southern part is an independent country that's part of the EU. And so I lived on the south part of the island there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, what was it about Cyprus? You know, you've been interested in energy since you were very young, and something about living in Cyprus that inspired that interest?
Yeah, absolutely. It was. You can definitely go into that. So, you know, Cyprus is a really wonderful place. It's a beautiful island. It's surrounded by, you know, it's got beautiful beaches and mountains and all of that. Absolutely gorgeous place to grow up. And the other really fascinating thing is it's sort of been at the crossroads of history for many, many years, thousands of years, in fact. And in fact, it's even mentioned in the Odyssey and the Iliad. And it's, you know, it was part of the part of ancient Greek history, ancient Roman history, and so forth. So very much been central. And the current way it's central right now in that part of the world is it's a huge shipping center. So, and of course, one of the large things that is shipped is oil that comes up through the Suez Canal to the rest of Europe and so forth. So Cyprus had a large part to play in that. The other thing that got me really interested in specifically in energy and climate change and so forth was that I was learning all about climate change, but living in Cyprus, living in a very developed country, which had a shockingly large number of droughts. And the droughts were extreme. I mean, I remember getting water, piped water to our house only 3 to 4 days sometimes. And drinking water, you'd have to go out to a dispenser and take a canister and fill up there. So it was one of those things where it was very clear that water was going to be very much affected by climate change. And there needed to be some sort of fix to the whole climate problem. And it was clear that fossil fuels were causing a lot of that. And then the other thing was every time I'd go back to India to visit my family that lived there, similar to Kenya, we used to have a lot of power outages and so forth, especially back then, and then water shortages, which are continuing even today. Yeah. And that was another sort of inspiration for getting interested in energy access and energy in general. And then finally, this question of energy security came up because Cyprus has 3 British Air Force bases. And while I was living there, the Iraq War broke out. And I remember just thinking to myself, wow, this energy is all concentrated within one part of the world, and there's clearly a lot of conflict surrounding that. So that was a third thing that got me really interested. With all of that interest, I started researching, reading, doing all of that at the ripe old age of 13 or so. And as I started getting more interested, I thought, okay, well, I need to really figure out how I can sort of help tackle this problem head on, which is why I ended up applying to university in the U.S. and moving out to Houston, which is sort of the center of the energy universe, or at least used to be.
Great. And you were at Rice, you did economics, you did chemical engineering.
That's right.
After school, you were a consultant for a while, and then you worked with Opower. What was your role at Opower? And maybe for viewers who don't know what Opower does, speak a little bit about what their mission is.
Absolutely. So part of the reason why I got really interested in sort of engineering and economics and all of that was I was very interested in understanding the energy problem from many different angles. And I think one of the angles was the technological side, of course, and the other was also the human side and just decision making and so forth. Opower was a very interesting place. So it was a clean energy company, a clean tech company that used data that was collected, customer energy data that was collected from the utilities, so billing data and so forth, and used that data and crunched it, analyzed it, and came up with recommendations for people like you and I on the other end who received our bills from our utilities. and gave those recommendations to us through your utility to help the utility save energy. And utilities are mandated to help their customers save energy, and so Opower used to be able to do that very efficiently. And I loved it. And part of the reason I think I enjoyed the role so much, which was working a lot on the strategy of the company, helping them with new products and new markets and so forth, was that it was a very interdisciplinary role. It was something that allowed me to make use of my technical knowledge that I had coming out of undergrad, but also make use of my economics and business side from consulting at BCG, and all of that got me very interested, and has continued to keep me interested in sort of how do we now see the next wave of innovation in the energy sector, next wave of entrepreneurship that will actually get us to sort of the goals that we need to be getting to.
I see. And you're finishing up your MBA. You have one more quarter because you're doing a dual degree with a master's in
energy and resources.
And you're going to spend your summer internship in Germany.
Yeah.
What prompted you to go and work with a utility in Germany for the summer?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I've spent the last 9 years or so in the U.S. and been very focused on the U.S. energy system and how energy transition should happen here, and innovation and so forth. But the thing that I haven't been able to, the thing that I think has been really interesting, in fact, rather, to figure out has been how Germany has been transitioning. So Germany, for all of our viewers, is undergoing a massive energy transition that has been going on, I think, for about the last 5 or 6, 7 years, maybe even longer, a decade or so. And we're seeing a huge amount of increase in renewables like solar and wind. And Germany isn't anywhere as sunny as Kenya, but still a ton of solar and wind. But at the same time, it's also got a lot of forward-thinking automobile manufacturers. And those manufacturers are sort of teaming up with the utilities to think about vehicle electrification. And so you've got this fascinating cauldron of all these different interesting ingredients going on, where Germany is sort of on the forefront of what's happening in the sector. And I think it would just be fascinating to learn about how they're dealing with the renewables and the integration of all those, but also how they're thinking about transitioning to an electric vehicle fleet in the long run. So that's why I was interested in going out working there for a summer.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And then in terms of world energy, climate news, we have these rumors, I guess, right now that President Trump is thinking about pulling the US out of the Paris Climate Accords. You have news coming out of India, positive news that they're going to cancel a bunch of coal in favor of solar because of the low cost of solar now worldwide. And then you talked to me a little bit about Exxon and their commitment to starting to implement some climate policies as part of the way they do business.
That's right.
So do you want to give us a little bit further perspective on those three big stories?
Absolutely. So I think, look, when it comes to the Paris Accords, I think it would be a travesty if the U.S. did pull out. Obviously, there's 196 countries signed up for the Paris Accords, and I didn't even know there were 196 countries. And I think you mentioned to me that a lot of those are small island nations who are, frankly, the most at risk.
Yeah.
And the U.S. pulling out really would be a setback. But here's where I think my take's a little different. I think while it isn't ideal, there are a few things in the U.S. specifically, and we'll get to China and India in a second, but there are a few things specifically in the U.S. that means that I'm a little less worried than most people are. The first is the U.S. has a very interesting state and federal system, and especially on energy matters, a lot of the really huge momentum that's been happening in terms of energy, renewable energy growth in the U.S. has been driven by the states. And it hasn't been driven as much by the federal level. Of course, the federal level, in which Donald Trump has some levers around, yes, it can have some impact, obviously, but a lot of it actually has been driven by the states, and that's been really great. So, whether we're talking about renewable energy production increases or whether we're talking about coal shutdowns, coal power plant shutdowns, all of that. The second thing is around businesses, and this is one of the big reasons why I came out to business school, is I really think businesses have the ability to make a positive social impact on the world, along with being profitable entities. I think both of those are not at odds with each other. And we're seeing that when it comes to issues around climate change. Businesses are stepping up and taking leadership where the federal government is starting to withdraw. And what we're seeing is that businesses are saying, look, we're going to stay committed to climate change resolution no matter what. We're going to be sourcing our energy from renewable energy. We're going to be taking a leadership stance. So for example, GE, Google, all these companies are also stepping up and saying, we're going to continue developing solutions. We're going to continue fighting this because to us, this is a very big issue.
Yeah.
And then, and then finally, or not finally, but rather to your point around India and China, I think if we start looking into that's where it gets really interesting because, we've often painted India and China as these sort of, wary customers of climate change. But really, if you think about it, every country is trying to do what's best for its citizens.
Yes.
And I think what we have to always remember is that India and China have a lot of people living in extreme poverty that need to be raised. What's amazing and what has been really, really incredible to see has been the fact that both those countries have taken a very strong stance, in fact, far stronger than their commitments in Paris, towards renewable energy.
Yeah.
And the other thing also being towards electric vehicle adoption. Both, because if you think about it, our energy system's split in two. There's power, which is coal and natural gas and all of that, and then there's oil, which is used for transportation. And both countries have been sort of very clear that they're going to be tackling both of those issues head on.
Yeah.
And that's fascinating. I mean, India, you're seeing huge amounts of renewable penetration, or it's growing at least. And China, I mean, they've deployed far more money than the rest of the world combined.
Yeah.
So we're just seeing huge growth there, and also we're seeing a large amount of EV adoption as well. And between those two things, I think India and China are really taking a leadership role when it comes to climate change, which for America, again, following up on America withdrawing, really that means that you sort of lose the moral high ground to some extent, but you also lose the chance to be an innovation-driven country and also be a leader in that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest risk that they face there. The last question I think you mentioned was around Exxon, and this has been very interesting. Back to this point around how businesses can have an impact. Today, ExxonMobil, the shareholders of Exxon, who are the people who own Exxon, including a lot of large financial institutions like banks and so forth, they voted with 62% of clearing the yes vote that they wanted Exxon to do a deeper analysis and a deeper climate risk assessment. Which, if you think about it, Exxon's entire business is selling oil and natural gas. So of course, climate change risk, there's going to be a ton of it as we keep moving into a world where people want to price carbon and so forth. I think that's very exciting news. I think it's going to mean that more and more oil companies will think very seriously about their own role in this energy transition, and hopefully we'll see more of them participating. Right. So I'm excited about that.
That's fantastic. Well, Apoorv, it's been a real pleasure having you on and speaking to you about all things energy.
It's been great.
Both for both of us, a huge passion.
Absolutely.
And look forward to all the big things you're going to continue to do in this space and others. And
Thanks so much, Jason. Love being on J Talk. Thanks.